my favorite part of any of these events is Q&A and talking through where are the areas that you're getting hammered by family members, by coworkers, by loved ones, by whatever you're seeing in media that you might have a question on pertaining to the biblical portion of this conversation. We'll kind of break it up by each section, right? Yeah. Yeah, we hear that a lot. I'm going to read you, I wish I could say this better than Randy Alcorn, but he has a he has a powerful quote on this. He said, "This argument is based on sterile logic so chilling as to suggest its place of origin, the pit of hell. God wants us to be appalled at and shrink from the shedding of innocent blood, not to construct theological arguments that minimize its horror." Like, murder's murder. And if we go in that line of thinking, any Christian could be murdered, and we could call it a good thing because they're going to, I mean, obviously, anytime we lose a Christian brother or sister, one of the first things we think is, well, thank God we know where they are, right? So of course that's going to create some solace, but should it ever be used as a justification for the killing of a Christian or a young child that may be, you know, in that state of grace, if that is where your theology lands? No. And should we say, well, let's let grace abound? I think Paul answered that one pretty clearly too, right? In Scripture, by no means should we sin and ask, for God's extra grace. So it's very chilling to me that people will use this argument. And I think we even have to be careful how we let our hearts settle on that, because that urgency that we should feel to do something can easily be put to rest if we could accept this chilling argument. Oh, well, they're going to go to heaven anyway, so might as well just keep on keeping on. So, yeah, does that help? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, typically it's about 20 weeks plus is considered a late-term abortion because they can't use the suction methods that they use.
Right, but then how old beyond 20
Full
weeks?
term.
Full term.
If they can find a doctor to do it. Thankfully, there are not a lot of them, but they are there, and they're expensive. They're not doing it as a charity. It can be $8,000, $10,000 for these moms if they can find a doctor that's willing to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there are no laws in Canada on the books against any abortion at any time. I think this is a tough one, but it really plays into that first question that God is God and we are not. And that was a unique time and a unique command that is certainly not given to us today. And really, one of the most compelling arguments that I read from William Lane Craig on that question is, if God could be considered a genocidal maniac because he ordered that particular destruction of life, then we would basically have to hold him accountable for every death that happened. He is the author of life and of death. So we would have to hold him accountable for every life that's cut short or ends at any point. And I found that to be relatively compelling. I don't feel like there is an easy answer for that one. And I will tell you, when I had my son 12 years ago, and I was reading through the Old Testament pretty fervently, I hadn't done a great job at that in my Christian life. That was a hard one. It's not an easy answer, but ultimately, do we trust that God is God and we are not? And I think as a Christian, we can rest in that if we trust his nature and his goodness, that even when it doesn't look good or feel good or sound good, it must be just, even though it feels pretty awful.
And I think you have to remember as well that God gave over 400 years for the Canaanites to repent.
Yeah.
And they did not. And he had, in his abundant mercy, allowed that to go on to the point, and in his foreknowledge, he knew. And so again, God is sovereign, and he did command that, but he gave unbelievable time for them to repent before he did.
I think as a middle-aged pro-life woman, that was one of the ones that was hardest for me to answer. And it's because it's emotionally difficult. And that's why most pro-choice arguers will throw these ones out there, is because it's not like, oh, well, flippant answer and we've got the, right? I mean, you don't even know who you're talking to. Many times I've been in a discussion with somebody, and thankfully God taught me how to handle these conversations with love, and I find out she's asking because she was raped, or she had an abortion as a result of rape, or she knows somebody that was raped. There is no way to get around that pain. And I think if we're talking to somebody and engaging somebody that asks us that question, we have to consider that. Where are they coming from? Is this maybe a part of their story? And did they maybe even were convinced to abort because of that? The reality, though, is that in cases of pregnancy resulting from rape, which are rare but not, again, 2 to 3% sounds small, but when you actually look at the numbers of how many women that is, suddenly it's like, oh, these are real human lives of people affected by this. In the instance of pregnancy resulting from rape, you have 2 victims and 1 perpetrator who deserves the death penalty. Because the man's not going to get the death penalty, let's be honest. Maybe some of us think he should. We'll just leave that for another discussion. Certainly harsher penalties than what we see, but why should a child be punished for the crimes of their father? Additionally, if you're thinking about the woman that's in, what's commonly brought up is every time she, looks at her pregnant belly or sees this child, she's going to be reminded of this horror that was done to her. That sounds very compelling until you think about the fact that an abortion is about the only worst thing that she could have to go through and endure. It doesn't undo the violence done to her. It multiplies the violence that's done to her. You can't undo something by killing a child. It's not a mercy to her. Now she's going to carry guilt and shame on top of the trauma of what was done to her. So if we really want to help women, we have to understand this is not healing. Abortion doesn't heal women. It hurts them, and especially hurts their children. On top of that, it really helps if you have friends or family members that I have a man that's done sidewalk ministry with me in Everett for years who was the result of rape. And he went and ministered to his father, who was still behind bars as a 50-year-old man. So when I started to speak really harshly about the types of penalties that rapists should get, he actually curbed me. And he's like, my daddy is who you're talking about, and he needs the gospel. And I was like, whew, major gut. We have to be so careful about how we talk about these things because we just don't know people's stories. So yeah, that's a very, very common argument. Imagine if we said that about a born child who got a diagnosis, though. I think we could just start there. It's horrific, right? Well, I've got a daughter with a chronic illness. So at one point in her life, she was completely dependent on us managing her illness to survive day to day. Dependency is not an excuse for murder. But let me take it from this perspective, another one that helps. It's a story, which it'll take just a minute, but it's not crazy long. So we worked with a woman, intervened on a sidewalk in Everett. She actually came to have her abortion after praying all night that God would stop her and send somebody. So my mentor, David, was out on the sidewalk, actually on his knees, which was not a common practice, but he was in the middle of praying about something. And all he heard was a car fly in the driveway, a door slam, and somebody rushing at him. So he got up real quick to see what was going on. And it was this young woman. And she said, "Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian?" Interesting question. He said, "Well, yes, I am. What can I do for you?" And she's like, "I prayed all night that God wouldn't let me do this." So she spared that baby that day, got connected to the local pregnancy resource clinic, started to have a lot of joy in her pregnancy, and at week 15 her baby was diagnosed with anencephaly. And if you're not familiar, it's a malformation of the brain. It just doesn't form completely. These babies have a very rough diagnosis, so time number 2, this mom was told, abort this baby. He's probably not going to survive delivery. If he does, their eyes are so swollen, the minute that umbilical cord is cut, they typically will pass away. It'll just save all of you heartache. And this mom has given me permission to share her story. We've walked with her for many years. So once again, she's in that position to make a choice for life. And that song, Reckless Love, is the anthem that I've shoved at her so many times because I've seen the Lord pursue her in crazy ways. The midwife she'd been seeing counseled her through that one. No mom that has ever chosen life for that baby with a disability has told me she regrets it. Every single one that chose abortion has lived with years of regret and pain. She carried that baby to term, and by God's grace, every day, she had parents that lived in Maui, so what a great place to carry. Babies are totally fine in utero, and she woke up every day, "Harrison, what are we gonna do today?" And they went parasailing, and she's just a crazy adventurer. They went snorkeling, they did all the things. But every day was, I'm gonna treasure every day I have with this child. Because what parent doesn't do that, right? This is already her baby. It's not a possible baby. It's already her baby. She could feel him kick. She knew that was the safest place he was ever going to be, and that's how much time they had together. And again, by God's grace, when he was born, his eyes were wide open, and I got to see pictures. He had big eyes. He was a sweet, sweet little baby, and they got minutes to lock eyes, and she knew she had done everything she could to be the best mom she could for Harrison. Now she's got his little feet tattooed on the top of her feet, and they go everywhere together still. She doesn't regret that time with Harrison, and she got to bring him to term and hold him in her arms and know she was the best mom that she could have been. These moms have to be encouraged. They're already moms. This is the worst nightmare that any parent could face. We love them through it. Our church loved her incredibly through this season and helped her get on to her next phase. But I think as soon as we recognize that what do parents do for born children that are sick, they care for them the best that they can, and the community hopefully will rally around them the best that they can. So there's never a reason to kill a child that's sick. There's just not. And most of the deformities and other things that are talked about, the other thing is ultrasound is so imperfect. It's so imperfect, and it scares me so much that we put so much stock into what these sonographers see in the ultrasounds. How many stories have you guys heard where, oh, the ultrasound doesn't look good, baby's born, and it's fine? Or it's not a life-ending thing, and these kids beat the odds. I mean, it happens over and over, sometimes not. But that mom now doesn't live with the shame and guilt of having killed her child in utero. And I know women who have had PTSD, anxiety, depression, major, major lifelong issues because they were convinced by some medical professional it would be kinder. It's a mercy. We don't do mercy killings. I mean, the reality is the body inside your body is not your body. Right? They're two distinct people. From that moment of fertilization, the DNA is already separate and completely present. All the instructions that made my husband have his gorgeous blue eyes and long eyelashes were there at the moment of conception. So these are two distinct individuals already. The dependency on the mother usually becomes the next conversation, right? Because once you can establish scientifically these are two distinct humans, like I said, 4 to 5 weeks, the blood is distinct even. You're not even talking about the same blood flow. The circulatory system's separate. So it's kind of funny in a good conversation to say, well, if a mother's pregnant, does she have 20 fingers and 20 toes? Does she have 2 hearts? Does she have 2, sets of lungs? By the way, if it's a boy, does she have male genitalia? Like, that's a kind of a weird question to have to answer, right? Clearly, this is a separate body that is, yes, it's carried inside her body, but scientifically speaking, it's a moot point. It's not her body that we're talking about. We're actually talking about a separate, when that heart is stopped, her heart continues to beat. So they're clearly distinct, and I think if we can kind of poke at that even with a little jesting to get them to acknowledge at least, most of the time people know, right? It's not like they don't know that's a separate body, but getting them to admit it in conversation usually drives the conversation in a different direction. You just have to be ready to tackle that dependency question. Yeah, adoption's an interesting one. We have to be careful how we talk about this, but what I have observed is this. I have always loved the sign that's the word abortion, but they cross out 2 letters and change it into adoption, right? But the concept behind that is actually a bit flawed, because if you think about a mom who's on her way to the abortion center, most of the time, the ones that I've encountered don't want an abortion. They will tell me, if we've had the conversation, gotten to the point of we have adoption resources, oh, I could never give my baby away for adoption, I'm going in for an abortion. Right? It makes no logical sense, but that is where she's at. And what we're asking her to do is to go from the single most selfish choice she could make in having an abortion to one of the most selfless choices that a human being could make in placing a child that they have carried and fallen in love with most of the time to a family that's ready and willing to place them. You talked about the angry people, and I know this is going to sound really weird, but I think God is it's so cool. The one thing I love about getting older is hindsight. I had some really weird jobs along the way, several customer service jobs, but I ended up loving those customer service jobs because it was my favorite thing in the world to get some irate, out of their mind customer and just get them to that point where I'm the only one they'll talk to, right? Because she fixed it for me, and I was able to talk them down off that ledge. In a weird way, and because we have the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, guiding us in these conversations, it's that same feeling that I get when I talk to some really irate pro-choicer, and they suddenly see that I'm not crazy, that I actually have thought through my position, and I can talk to them lovingly and openly about it. I don't know that everybody's going to have that. I know it's kind of probably an oddity about me. But if you can get to the point of embracing that and understanding that that anger is driven from these people are literally walking around blind and flailing. And if we can see them with compassion. What I taught my kids from a young age is we have the truth, we have the light of Jesus, but if we take it and we shine it in their eyes and just like blind them with it and are, unkind about it, they're just going to do this and they're going to run away. We will shine that light, but the gospel is offensive. In and of itself, you are a sinner in need of grace. That is offensive, but it's the truth, and we know it. We've accepted that grace. It's always going to be offensive, but we don't need to add to it. I love it when people are like, oh, I'm being persecuted because I'm a Christian and I'm shining the light of Jesus. And I'm like, actually, you're just being kind of a jerk. So if we can figure out how to become settled, this is a horrifying conversation to have with people. I can't tell you how many times I've walked away and said to my husband, why do we even have to have this conversation? This is crazy. This is great, but it's the reality of a fallen world. And for me, going out and doing life chain events or doing prayer at abortion clinics or just spending time thinking about this, when I then turn and worship my Creator, He has never looked more beautiful than when we engage in the darkness over here and realize, what we've been saved from, or we're part of at one point, depending on our story, right? And we were all part of darkness. So I would encourage everybody, obviously you have to know yourself. There are some people where this is just not a great place for you to engage. Find somewhere behind the scenes. Don't go be a jerk. But I've been there, okay? I can say that from personal experience. I have struggled to have this conversation, which is why I said I wouldn't have it any longer. We have to be, just like Jeff said, as long-suffering as our Savior has been with us and the generations before us. We're still here. He must have a purpose for us. And so when we encounter this darkness, it can cause us to be angry. And we just have to keep laying that at His feet and asking us for His heart towards people. One thing that my mentor does, which I think is hilarious, it was actually Daniel, was leading a prayer walk outside the Everett Planned Parenthood. We had this planned, not knowing that the Roe v. Wade verdict was going to come down that day, and Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we were already supposed to be at this clinic that day with Daniel from North Carolina. It was so cool. So we were down there, and you got a lot of really mad people in America that day, okay? It was a lot of pink-haired, blue-haired, very angry people. And so then literally this guy comes driving up in a Jeep, blaring some disgusting song about abortion that I'd never heard before, with a coat hanger, penciled onto the back of his car, pink mohawk, and he gets out just irate, just freaking out. This crowd of Christians is like, okay, what is coming? Most of them hadn't been on a sidewalk before. And my dear mentor, who is just like a master at engaging people, was able to say, hey, come park your car over here. Let's have a conversation. The guy did it. He just needed an invitation. And we watched that man de-escalate. We watched them shake hands, and the guy drove off. And the whole crowd there was like, what just happened? Well, what my mentor has said is he tries to picture these people as they're coming at him with anger and pink mohawks and the whole 9 yards as children. Everybody was a child. If we claim to care about these children, remember that those who are broken by this world, either their own sin or sin that's been done against them, and at the point that these people get to, they were children once too, and they're in need of love just as much as these little babies need to be rescued. They need to be saved from their sin. So that has helped me a ton in dealing with people, that it's not, their anger is not the chief concern. And if we can really listen to them first, that's the key. You got a lot of really good arguments. We've proven that today. We've got the truth on our side, but if you listen first, you earn their respect, and they know you actually care. You're probably going to have to listen to some crazy things, let me tell you. I've listened to some real crazy commentary. But you can also get them to expose their own worldview by asking questions first. Instead of making assumptions about who they are, if you ask them questions, then you know exactly how to deal with what their flavor is of this worldview, and that's been super helpful.
Two things I want to say. One thing that when I was with Daniel one day, he was talking about how listening to the person, that especially somebody that wants to have an abortion, listening to their reasons and asking them, what is it that you think is, unstoppable for this? Is an abortion is the only answer. And he said, no matter what their answer is, you can't, like he said, one time he heard it was like, well, I won't fit into my wedding dress.
Yeah.
And instead of saying to her, what are you, nuts?
Yeah.
He said, well, that must be really hard for you.
Yeah.
And to come at it with that attitude of understanding where they're coming from, and then dealing with it from that point on. instead of in your brain, you're going, what, are you nuts?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me, right?
Yeah.
So that was something that was really, I
so
learned
good.
from him. And then another thing about some of the anger issues on the street and whatnot, you got to remember too that it's a spiritual battle we're fighting.
Yeah.
And one day when we were outside of the Whatcom Clinic praying, somebody drove by. Now, keep in mind, I mean, we're wearing our Love Life shirts, but nowhere on there does it say, hey, we're a bunch of Christians, right? It could be in any pro-life group. But somebody drives by and out of the car screams, God hates you. Okay. Like, where did that come from other than a spiritual battle?
Yeah.
Right? That's a satanic attack on a Christian trying to get your brain around that. No, God doesn't like what you're doing. You know, so it's important to realize that these are spiritual battles that we're fighting.
Yeah, two follow-ups to that. You're probably not going to, the majority of you do sidewalk ministry, but a lot of the things we're talking about can apply to any conversation in your circles, right? One of the things about listening is it kind of gave me a chuckle. I did an outreach actually the time you were up in Bellingham with a couple up there that hadn't done a ton of outreach. And so they were just watching for women to go in the clinic, right? And this woman that was probably 75 approaches the clinic very clearly, and a little bit, older, probably not childbearing age. And the person that was with me was just so full of enthusiasm. She goes, "You don't have to do this. Don't kill your baby." And I was like, whoa, we really got to learn to read the room. Like, that's probably not what's going on here. So in our enthusiasm, we kind of just have to take a breath and slow down and ask questions because we could do damage. I mean, we've had people get mad at us because obviously in a lot of those clinics, we don't know for sure what they're going in for. So the proper call out is usually, we don't know what you're here for, but if you're here for abortion, blah, 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 blah. Because people will get irate. I would never have an abortion. I'm here for birth control. This place doesn't just do abortions. And you're like, all right, well, let's open a conversation about that. But listening and being open to that conversation is huge. That assumption that we're Christians blesses me to no end. I have a story from David, who's our co-founder of Abundant Life. He did sidewalk outreach for 28 years. He was at a clinic and had a woman just, screech up super, super fast and tore out of her car, started just cussing him out, just really angry. How could you be here? And you don't care about women and all this stuff. Jesus wouldn't like you out here. And he was just kind of taking it at that point. He goes, Jesus? What makes you think I care anything about Jesus? And she was like, what? And he goes, yes, of course I'm a Christian, but isn't that interesting that you would make that assumption? Because it is very clearly a spiritual battle, and it is demonic. And if we call it anything else, I think we're missing the mark on what it is that we're actually up against here, for sure. And then a few minutes later, another guy passed by him, rolled down his window, and was like, I'm praying for you, brother. Same thing, but different side of the coin, right? And we hear that a lot when we're out there, too. We get the encouragement, and we get the "you're number ones." So, it's a mixed bag. Were you to live in 1800s America when slavery was legal, do you have no right to speak against slave owners if you're not a slave owner yourself? I mean, you can make a moral distinction no matter your gender. Also, imagine if you were to tell a woman, you have no say over the rape laws because you're not a man. How could you possibly understand? Whoa, you don't have the right, genitals. You can't speak about that. That's like, pretty classic sexism. Women are not for that. So it's just a really sexist remark from a woman. So if you can get a good rapport with her, I think you can kind of, point out some of those logical fallacies that you can, anybody that lives in a society, in a community, can make a moral distinction regardless of their gender, their, what's the list now as a company that you have to say? It's pretty clear that as a society, we are against that until it comes to this one issue. So the question would be why? Why do women want men to stay out of this decision? Well, yes, the reality is you do oftentimes get what is the word I want to use? You're carrying the responsibility if a man walks away. But that takes the conversation even further back to, well, what was God's design for marriage and sex? It was to be in a safe and loving marriage so that when that child came along, that wasn't a problem. Yes, dare we say the word abstinence? Apparently now we have to say sexual risk avoidance because the word abstinence is now a bad word. I still say it. Sue me. I'm going to get canceled. But yeah, I mean, we have to, that's really, if you follow Live Action at all, Lila Rose has just released a really cool YouTube series on just sexuality right now, because this is coming back to that. That's obviously this, there's a reason that this is happening over and over again. And the solution for sexual sin, just like it always has been back to Old Testament times, is to get rid of the baby. So, yeah. Babies don't magically appear in the womb. There's something that has to happen before that point. And
So is that rude to say that, or would that just be an inflammatory remark? You've
think-
already made your choice?
here's what I have found, and you'll have to, everybody's different, right? I have a relatively good sense of humor. I'm kind of sarcastic. Well, I shouldn't say a good sense of humor. I am sarcastic. Okay, some people appreciate that, some people don't. If you start a conversation, let's just say, I mean, this is a sidewalk interaction, but it could be anywhere. If somebody comes raging at me off a sidewalk when I'm doing outreach, first thing I'm going to do is, my name's Beth. What's your name? You know, I'm going to stop. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to say, I'd love to talk to you about this. You know, do you mind just taking it? Because they're not expecting me to actually want an interaction. They're expecting a fight. So de-escalation is my first thing, just like in customer service, right? And then as you kind of build that rapport, as you're talking to somebody, you first rule, remember their name. If they actually are willing to give it to you, remember their name. And as you continue in that conversation, or if it's somebody you already know, just be real with them, you know? And I think that if you have a sense of humor at all, you could probably sprinkle in some of these things. Like, let's just be real here. Or my mentor, I love the way he'd be like, can I just challenge you with something? Like, I hear what you're saying. I you know, my body, my choice. I understand that you feel like you're kind of under attack here because something's happening that maybe you didn't want, but would you be willing to consider, could I challenge you with this? And I think if you ask people that way, they're immediately like, well, I guess so. Yeah, I'm game, sure, why not? You know, it kind of changes the tone of the conversation. So here's my opinion. I don't think there's anything you can't say to people if you do it in love, to be honest with you. I have been able to say some really hard things. I'll give you an example. I was at the very last standing abortion clinic in Louisville, Kentucky. Crazy trip that I was on. And I was doing outreach, and these two ladies came up, and they were not happy that I was there. One of them had a chair, and she sat down. And as we talked, we were talking about babies with disabilities and how, you know, well, their life's going to be horrible, and their parents just need to, you know, end it now so that they can try again. Love that statement, like it's a pot roast or something. So as I'm talking to her, she says, well, I'm kind of glad that ultrasound wasn't very good because I have a disability, but my parents didn't know, and they've loved me really well. And at this point, I just got down, she was in a chair on her level, and I can't remember what her name was. I've got it written down. I think it was Deborah. Deborah, aren't you glad to be alive? Like, why would you want that for anybody else? And was able to break through because she was willing to talk to me after some discourse. So I've said, I mean, that wasn't a hard thing necessarily, but I've been able to say some really hard things to people because they know I'm not just in it to win it. I'm not trying to get a one-up on them. I'm not trying to win. I want to see them as a person and a child of God and somebody that, you know, is lost. So I think a lot of it is your tone, not what you say. You can say some really, really hard things. I mean, think about what Jesus said. How many, you know, what did he say? Which husband is it? I can't remember exactly what he said to the woman at the well at the moment, but it was like, oh, that was kind of a burn, right? Like he wasn't always nice. We can't be nicer than Jesus, right? He said the truth, but people wanted, you know, some people, the people that didn't want to hear it, they left and he let them go. But the people that were willing, he said some really hard things to. So I don't think we can do any less, but we do have to have that heart of love. I can't imagine what it was like to look into Jesus' face. He loved him. What I was taught was yes and amen. Whatever I can do, I'm here with you. Whatever I can do to stand with you through this, I'm here to do it with you. You're not alone. The reality is we will never fix every one of her problems. There's only one that can do that. We'll point her to him. We can fix some of her problems. We can help and with some tangible needs. In Washington, because of the coalition of resources that we have most of the answers tangibly for things like that. Here, through Riverside Calvary Chapel and other houses of refuge, answers can be found for sure. But the answer to a difficulty is never the death of a child. There will be so many different, and I know you know that, I'm just saying, you know, to be able to really have that settled, we will get hammered with these many times exceptions, but the reality is when I started doing sidewalk outreach, I'm a church girl my whole life. My parents were great, pretty protected, very naive. I was like, well, they choose life, and it's butterflies and rainbows, and they're going to get married, obviously, to the dad, and then their parents are going to celebrate, and it'll be great, right? I mean, I wouldn't have said that out loud, but somewhere I think that's what I really believed would happen. And the stories are complex, and they're coming from a place of sin upon sin upon sin that they're trying. You're now trying to help them unravel the reality of their sin. It was told to me that the wages of sin are death, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the issue of abortion, right? So it will be hard. And I don't think there is like, well, if she just does 1, 2, and 3, she'll be great. But I think for me, when I'm connected to a mom who's considering abortion, you're stuck with me now. I mean, they can get rid of me, but it'll be hard. I'm going to follow them around. I'll text them years later. I'm still going to be checking in on them. We'll be having lunch. I'm your person now. And if every single person in the Church of Jesus Christ would do that, we wouldn't have any moms that felt like they didn't have somebody, or a spiritual mom or grandma or family or community. So I think it really starts with us, and you showed up and did that counseling, and what you had to give, you gave. If each of us gave what we could out of our gifting, and we're just a friend to those people, and you were probably somewhat limited in the kind of follow-up you could do with a pregnancy clinic, but as a church, certainly, if we're connected to a mom,
that's where we're at. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole point of House of Refuge. That's the whole point of Love Life, is engaging the church to be that answer. Because what is the answer? The answer is the gospel. To bring the gospel and the love of Jesus to these women that need it. And it doesn't matter what their circumstance is, they need Jesus above and beyond anything else. And so that's the whole goal of what Love Life is all about, and what House of Refuge is that church approach. And that's what we want to train mentors and have people that are ready to come alongside men and women that are in unplanned pregnancies or have had abortion in their past. All of this stuff is what this whole situation, this whole idea is all about. And I thought it was so beautiful yesterday when we were at our pastor's lunch. Daniel, he said he was talking about the organization of Love Life. And he's like, one day I want us not to exist. His goal is that they don't exist because the churches are engaged. That's the whole point. The church has not stepped up to be what it needs to be. It's been giving up its rights, its what it should be doing to all these parachurch, pregnancy resource centers, this center, that center, all these different places. These are all things that the church should be doing. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to do. And yesterday was a blessed day, I got to tell you. We had 6 different churches represented here, and I believe that 4 of them for sure are going to sign up and become houses of refuge. So, I mean, that is a beautiful thing. And, and then they can talk to other people, and they can talk to other people, and hopefully it will take off in Canada, and the church can begin to get engaged. When I look at the statistics from you guys, when you see the nationwide statistics since 2016, and you see the amount of churches just rolling constantly and just getting bigger and bigger in the more and more cities, it's like, we need that in Canada. Yeah. And it's not about Love Life. It's not about whatever organization. It's about the churches. We need to get the churches involved. And that's what it's all about. And that's the answer to every question, is the gospel.
Amen. If you're having the conversation from a biblical perspective, that can be kind of a tricky one for sure. And I think that as Christians, we have to know that even if somebody hasn't seen the truth yet, we have the truth. It's sort of the same as a Christian telling me, you shouldn't legislate your morality. You shouldn't expect everybody else to follow the same laws that you believe. This isn't a theocracy? This isn't a theocracy. Well, yeah, but all of our laws are based on moral distinctives, right? So if we're talking to somebody who doesn't believe the Bible, that's fine, but where's your moral compass coming from then? So say we throw the Bible out, then how would you decide? And that's going to get into kind of our next discussion too. But as a Christian, I think we can be very confident that if we believe this is true, that it is really wrong to end the life of a baby in utero, whether or not other people see it, we can still argue it confidently and at least know where to point them to in Scripture if they say, well, what basis do you have for this? And then they're probably going to change their argument once you can show them, well, this is what Jesus says about children, but if you want to know what science or logic and ethics say about it, we can talk about that too. I do think it's wise to have these other pieces because if you are talking to someone that's not a believer, you may be talking to somebody who would take science seriously, and then once they see that the science coalesces with what Jesus says, they may suddenly look at Jesus a little bit differently too. God can use anything to convince people. That's a super good question because I think that comes up a lot. How can you just impose your beliefs on other people? Well, I believe that little innocent people shouldn't be killed. I think we could probably all agree on that if we thought it through, right? So we can kind of take it a step back too, but always landing in Scripture as our ultimate guide. If you're not familiar, an ectopic pregnancy is when a fertilized egg attaches itself either to the fallopian tube, which is common, or actually it can float outside of the uterus and attach itself to a spleen or another organ. Super dangerous, very unlikely that medical advancements as they are today that baby could ever be carried to term, especially if it's in a fallopian tube. I've talked to a couple of you already. I'm very open about our story, but 2 months after taking this position as a very first time I was in vocational ministry, in a pro-life ministry, we found out we were pregnant with our third baby. Super excited. Then we thought we miscarried. Devastated. Anybody that's been through that knows that journey. But as a mom of 2 already, I was like, I still really feel pregnant. What is going on? And so I went and I had my hormone levels checked and they were spiking. So long story short, after a lot of tests, determined that we had an ectopic pregnancy, which led to a lot of questions between me and God. What is going on? I literally just took a job trying to fight for these babies, and you've put me in an impossible situation. What am I to do? And it was, I won't go too much into the struggle that we had, but ultimately had to be treated for that ectopic pregnancy and lost that third baby. It was in my fallopian tube. So what I can tell you firsthand from that experience is a couple of things. One is just like in the rape and the exceptions, don't minimize that. There are actually a lot of women that have experienced ectopic pregnancies. I've met them now because I talk about it openly, and so they come and tell me about theirs, which I'm sure if you've miscarried or had any other scenario like that, you've had a similar experience. It's real and it happens, but I can tell you something that's really interesting. I was treated at a Catholic hospital that does not perform abortions. They pushed me hard to end the life of this little baby before we really had a chance to know what was going on. So I was counseled by everybody. I was lectured in the ER because I went for many ER visits trying to wait and see, watchful waiting, what's going on, where is this baby? And they pushed hard for that procedure. Additionally, if you look at any of the statistics for abortion, do you know what you won't find on the list of abortions and the statistics that have happened either in the US or Canada? From pro-abortion organizations like Guttmacher or the Canadian Institute for Health, you actually won't find ectopic abortions because it's not considered an elective abortion. This is not in any way, shape, or form elective for these moms. There is no current scientific process for moving a little fertilized egg into the appropriate place. So while people will use ectopic pregnancies as advocacy for abortion, even the abortion agencies won't use ectopic pregnancies as part of their numbers because it's not the same thing. So it's really important to understand how even the conservative hospitals view it as a completely separate triage type situation. The most pro-life thing in that instance was not for me to fall on the sword and die along with my unborn baby, as difficult as that decision was for my family. So I think it's really important we understand that there are actually a lot of women that experience ectopic pregnancies and that it is not considered even by the abortion complex an elective abortion. So there could be, like early in pregnancy, a woman could be told, you should abort because if you carry this baby, X, Y, or Z could happen. So she might abort early for that reason. But oftentimes, late-term abortion is the target for that argument But let me ask you a question. If a woman has preeclampsia, we'll use that as an example, so high blood pressure, and the only thing that's going to stop that high blood pressure is the placenta being delivered out of her body, why then would we do a 1, 2, and 3 day invasive procedure, which is what it takes to do a late-term abortion often, to try and save her in an emergency situation? You would do a C-section or you would induce. You need to, sometimes that baby does have to come out or both mom and baby will die. But in that instance, the heart of the doctor is, let's deliver the baby, let's do what we can for the baby, let's do what we can for the mom. Killing that baby and destroying its life is never necessary to save the life of a mother. Early delivery is, and you don't have to take my word for it. The U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop said, in my 36 years in pediatric surgery, I have never known of one instance where the child had to be aborted to save the mother's life. Even more interestingly, Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who was the first president of Planned Parenthood, and the Guttmacher Institute is named after him, said today, this was 50 years ago, by the way, today it's possible for almost any patient to be brought through pregnancy alive, unless she suffers from a fatal illness, such as cancer or leukemia, and if so, abortion would be unlikely to prolong, much less save life. That was Dr. Alan Guttmacher of Planned Parenthood, guys. So like, if you talk to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Anthony Levatino. He used to be an abortionist. I got to spend some time with him at our 2022 conference and talk to him about this. Early delivery is the answer every time. I had an emergency C-section with my first. Do you know how fast they got that baby out by the time I'd been pushing for 3 hours and we had some distress? It is fast. Abortions are not that fast. They are not safe. They have a lot of complications, and especially a late-term abortion can be a multi-day process. So it actually does not make sense. As compelling as that argument may feel, it doesn't make sense that dismembering a child is somehow going to speed up that mom's recovery.
And I have to jump in here because we have a personal story that goes exactly to this point. Our daughter-in-law was pregnant with twins. She went into labor at 19 weeks. Jump in and correct me if I mess up. But that baby began to be born. And the water broke on one of the babies. They had separate sacs. And the baby's foot was actually starting to through the cervix. And so they had no clue what to do. So they rushed her from Abbotsford to Women's Hospital. And the labor stopped. And they were totally unsure about what to do. But they were telling her that, you know, her life was in danger, and she needed to abort because this one was gonna die, and then the next one, you know, she'd deliver, and the next one would be delivered, and they wouldn't survive. It was 19 weeks. And she said, no, I can't do that. We're just gonna depend and trust on the Lord. And so the doctor said that there was a slight chance that if this first baby was delivered so gently that they could tuck the umbilical cord back up in and somehow keep the second baby in, there was a chance. And so amidst a lot of prayer, there was a lot. That's what happened. To make a long story short, that baby was delivered. It was, 3 days before? And so that baby was born, stillborn.
He was amazing.
Oh, yeah.
He even had just calves.
Yeah. It was just these bulky little calves. I was like, yeah. Anyway, that was my grandson. Yeah. But anyway, but then the other baby stayed till 26 weeks. 26 weeks, and then Joe was born, and now he's like 6'1", 18 years old, and doing great. But, they said, no, you got to abort. It's gonna, your life's in danger. I said, no, God's in control.
I mean, it's, again, a very chilling argument, but common, actually. I'm not your incubator is another commentary that comes out. I don't ask for this. I don't want to be your incubator. The parasite one's easy. Parasites aren't of the same species. So, I mean, that's just kind of a open and shut case right there. We don't have parasites that are the same species. The location of that baby does not give you a right to kill it. And the incubator one as a mom, it just really ticks me off. Like, what? Is that all you think of your mom? She was just your incubator? Like, I don't think anybody in society, when they see a pregnant mom, we're crazy. When we see a pregnant mom out in public, we're always like, oh, oh, look at that. It's so amazing. It's such a miracle. I mean, where have we fallen as a culture to dare say something like that about the beauty of motherhood? You know, I think we have to help this culture reclaim that awe and reverence and just love of what's happening in a mom's body when she has a baby, to reduce it to something so sterile as, you know, I'm just not going to be your incubator is really, really sad. So I do think that burden somewhat is on us to be a people that love children, that love babies and love moms that are expecting babies. And I think about this mom dealing with cancer with twins, you said, with 2 newborns and a baby at home. She needed help, I would guess. Hopefully her family was there, but as a church community, like what we could do for a family in that scenario. And I've been blessed to be a part of churches that do. They look for those families that are struggling and find ways to love them after those babies are born. I think that's so important. I've met a couple of those pro-lifers, and one of them that is up for prison is also a guy that smuggles Bibles into China. Like, these are the cream of the crop Christians, amazing people, gentle Christians. I'm not concerned about it because I have not chosen to rescue, and so they specifically crossed that invisible line in the sidewalk that I don't cross because I know where it is, and I am not called the prison ministry. But I have great respect for those Christians that have... The reality is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the rescue movement that was happening in the U.S. I don't know if it happened in Canada or mainly the U.S., but in the 80s, there were tens of thousands of Christians going out to abortion clinics doing basically civil disobedience a la Martin Luther King Jr. They would do sit-ins. Peaceful sit-ins. They would sit down in front of and block the entrance to the abortion clinics and lay down their lives for these little babies. They would be arrested en masse at such a degree that they would have to put them in the school gymnasium. It would take the police all day to carry these Christians away from the abortion clinic to the school. And then how are you going to prosecute, you know, that many people? It was pretty remarkable. It took a lot of courage there. John Piper, if you're familiar with him, was part of the rescue movement. Randy Alcorn was part of the rescue movement. These brave pastors basically put everything on the line for these babies because they believe they're made in the image of God and that we should do something about it. So there are some groups of Christians that are still doing rescues now in the United States and facing what's called the FACE Act. Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances is what that stands for. Bill Clinton, our lovely President Bill Clinton, put that in place, and it carries with it up to 10 years in prison and like $250,000 fine. So that killed the rescue movement pretty quickly, unfortunately. And the Christians that are choosing to do it now, I think, are doing it less as an effort to get back to what was and more as a calling of conscience to the nation. We've got a lot of apathetic people across our nation that don't even want to talk about this, let alone go put their life, their reputation, their finances on the line. The ones that I know, anyway, that have been a part of it, like I said, very gentle, peaceful, wonderful. I mean, if you watch a video of them, Tucker Carlson, if you ever watched Fox News, which I don't necessarily recommend, but he had a great piece on these Christians, satire, basically. Look at these violent, scary pro-lifers, and it was like they're you know, on their floor-length skirts, and they're singing their hymns, and it's like, what are we afraid of here? But yeah, I'm not afraid of it because I know the rules and I do abide by those rules because I don't feel that I've been called to that particular form as of yet. Jared, you? No? But should that change, I'll let you know. Jeff will send you some pictures.
Yeah, and you know, that's something else that, you know, we want to have people to understand too, just about the love life idea is not a protest.
Yeah.
We're not protesting. When we go out and do a prayer walk, that's what we're doing. We're not engaging people. Mm-hmm. That's up to the sidewalk ministry team, and they're specially trained to do that kind of thing. The prayer walk is exactly that. We are praying, and we're not getting in anybody's way. We're staying off public or private property, all those kinds of things. I'm so blown away when I go down and we're around a Planned Parenthood, and the leaders of every city know that nope, you can't cross that line right
Yeah.
there. That's their property. Like they know it inside and out.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a protest, right? And it's not activism. It's loving them. It's Christianity 101.
Yeah, and the
right?
caricature that's been built of pro-life Christians is very unfair. Yes, you're going to have your odd guy out there screaming at somebody, you're going to go to hell. But I have seen that so little. The people that show up at those clinics are brokenhearted, and they're trying to offer help and hope in the name of Jesus to these moms that think they have no other options. So don't believe that. I mean, most of the people, I guess by nature we're sort of protesting the fact that, abortion's happening by showing up at all, but the heart is not the heart of protest and activism.